Hey everyone, and welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. I am Kathy Carter, and Bible 365 is the title of what I'm doing, sort of my job. My job is that every day I'm reading through the Bible. I'm going to take 1 year to read through the Bible chronologically using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan. And every day I'm giving you my views on the reading. So I find pieces in here. I try to give you an overview of everything that happens. And then I find things in here that I either found interesting or stood out to me, or maybe things that we've never really discussed in a big way before. And I try to bring that to the attention because these are the things that I feel like God is showing me and God wants me to share via video. So I am again using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan. If you have never been with me before, I would love if you downloaded it. You would just go online. It's the 1 year chronological Bible online, and I have no affiliation to it. I just think it's a great reading plan. And it goes through the Bible historically from start to finish instead of just book by book by book. And so it's a great reading to help you really understand who God is, who we are in the story of who God is, why it matters, why following him is important, and why it's the truth, right? Because I believe wholeheartedly it's the truth. And so why it's the truth. Today, I'm going to start a little bit differently because uh, I went to go see a movie today, and I already did actually a movie review. So if anyone's interested in it, although you'll get some of it in here, but I went to go see Dune 2. So it's the sequel. It's Dune Part 2, which is sort of the second half of the book. If you're a reader, you know I love to read first and then watch movies later. Obviously, like this, I like to read it first and then give my views on it afterwards. And so I was really excited. And in preparation, because I loved the first movie, but in preparation for going to this movie today, I forced my kids to, and again, I forced them because they're not a lover like I am. I forced them to watch the first movie. So in bringing this up, I'm going to give a teensy tiny about the second movie, but mostly about the first movie. And the reason it matters is because I loved this first movie. And this first movie, as I was watching it today, I feel like it had everything to do with our reading. So the first movie built up, and what I liked about it so much, right, was it built up the characters. It was really slow. It's a slow movie. It's a science fiction movie, and it was really slow. And what it had you do in this first movie is it had you sort of fall in love with the areas and the people that were in this movie, right? It had you recognize each character and what their strengths were, what their weaknesses were, what was good, what was bad, who was in the right, who was in the wrong, where was truth, right? So this was, and this was what the book did really well, and this is what I think the first movie did really, really well. There was a clear distinction between right and wrong, who were the good people, who were the bad people. And there was a slow buildup of each person. And so this is what I think is great about a good movie. And again, this is a good movie for me. So I know for me, I like the good guys to win and I like the bad guys to lose. That wasn't always true. But now, as I am, as I'm more of a follower of faith in Christianity, I believe that there is right and wrong and good and bad. And although sometimes it's hard to see, I like the good guys to win. And that doesn't always happen in our world, as I'm sure all of you know, with all the stuff that's going on today. And but I like my movies to do that. Like I don't want to go to a movie that emulates everything about real life and then continue to be sad that real life is really hard and people suck. I want to see when a good guy is good and a bad guy is bad. So they do that for you, right? They build up these character developments, and what happens in the first movie is there's this big build up, and you realize that this one house, I'm not going to give a huge amount of spoilers, but this one house is made of really good people, not perfect people, but good people, loving people, people who try to work with other people and be honest, right? Like all these kind of things. And at the end of that movie, essentially that house is broken by the villains, and the villains just want to own everything, and they're greedy for power and money, and they manipulate and they lie, and they're really dark. Like they make it obvious. The characters are like all in black and everything is really dark. But what we see at the end of the movie is although the house is broken, there are some remnants in this house that are left over, and they're going to start building up. They find people, and then they start to build up, and then the movie sort of ends, and we go, oh my gosh, okay, what's going to happen next? They found these other set of people, and maybe collectively they're going to work together and they're going to destroy the evil. So I tell you this because in the second movie, there was no clear distinction between good guy and bad guy. Um, Everyone started having shades of gray. And that's not how the book went. And again, I like to be true to the book, if at all possible, especially if I loved the book. That's not how the book went. They were not true to character. These shades of gray characters, it got to the point where at the end, the villain was the villain, but I was like, do I really hate him? And the hero of the story was not really, not that he wasn't heroic, but that everyone around him didn't really want him to be the hero that he was supposed to be. So it was, and at the end, it was left very unfinished and very uncomfortable, where I wasn't sure that I wanted the good guy to succeed in the way in which he succeeded. And so it left me feeling, I don't know, gross in a way. Like, was I supposed to clap at the end? Am I glad that they won? So it was very uncomfortable for me. And I sort of felt that way throughout. Like, I just felt like they kept throwing the hero under the bus in ways that maybe he shouldn't have been. Again, I gave you some spoilers on that. The whole reason I'm bringing that up is because I like to know what's right and wrong. I like truth. I like to know good guys, bad guys. And I know that's, at this point, it's really hard to find. And I'm saying this because I believe, like, our what we're reading today is that is this buildup of communities. So we went through the book of Genesis. And so at this point, we've done, I think, 5 books at this point. So we've done Genesis, we've done Job, we've done Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And so in each area, we've sort of started to discover who God was. He's given us a little bit more of who he is in every single book, right? And so he's built up his people. So we met his people in the book of Genesis. And then in the book of Job, we figured out a little bit more of who God was. And then in the book of Exodus, we meet Moses, who's our main character. Moses is our leader, right? So in some ways, we would say he's our hero. Not perfect. Moses is not a perfect man. He doesn't do everything right. And we see that God punishes when he doesn't do everything right. And when the people who are under him don't do everything right, God is just in his punishments when he does these things. But he is the leader, and he is sort of right underneath God in his leadership. God sort of gives him the power over the Israelites to command them in all of God's laws. So God is the ultimate leader, and then Moses is leading the people and has responsibility for the people. And so we start to understand more of who he is, right? He's a broken person that murders somebody, and then God protects him and brings him back, and then has him do all of these miracles to save these people. And then he brings these people up to the mountain and introduces them to God, right? So we get this slow build up. We start to find out who all the people are, and the people start moaning and groaning, right? They're in some ways becoming bad guys. They start moaning and groaning, and then God punishes them because of it. And then because they wouldn't go in the land that they were supposed to go to, they have to move around, right? And a generation has to die. And then we see them, now they're coming back. And so now we're now invested in the Israelites, right? We want to see, are they going to listen to who God is? We've learned more about who God is, right? So we're finding more truth about who he is and why he wants to do what he wants to do. Why is it? Why did he pick these Israelites out, right? Why did he separate them from the rest of the world, right? I'm going to say there were other people in the world that knew who this God was, right? Like Abraham had a lot of other descendants. And we can see in some areas where God protects some of those people, right? Like I think it was yesterday, we see that he protected some of Lot's area and land. We see he protected Esau's, right? These were descendants of people that he made a covenant with. They were not people he made a covenant with, but they were descendants of people he made a covenant with. So they knew him. They maybe didn't necessarily follow him, and they didn't necessarily not have idols. I'm going to say that they did have idols, and they were following many other gods, much to his as upset as he would be about that, right? Because we see that he does not want you following any other gods. So, but why the Israelites, right? Why did he protect these people? Why did he take these people and pluck them out of slavery, move them to a different area, make them have all of these rules, right? Tell them all of these things that they were no longer allowed to do because they were worshiping the one true God? Why did he do that? And I'm going to say he did that so the world can see God's power, God's perfection, that he is the God that created the world. And we're going to see things in here and some of the things that I'm going to point out of why I think that he did that. So hopefully you're starting to really, like I said, I'm hoping you're getting invested in your understanding, and you're caring about who these people are, right? Like you start to care about who Moses is. I'm sad because Moses can't go into the land of Canaan, because he's humble and he's loving and he's following God. He's obeying, right? He's doing all these things. And yet he doesn't get to go in the land of Canaan because the people screwed up so badly. And he didn't honor God as holy in some ways because of the people, right? Because they were complaining like, oh, we don't have water. They're whining and complaining, even though they see God. So I'm hoping in this, at this point, we're going to see Moses is talking. They have now settled in this area right outside of Israel or Canaan. They're waiting to go in Canaan, and Moses is passing the torch, and Moses is now giving them everything that God said to him. He is reminding them of their story, and he reminds us of this story, which we're going to see all through the Bible, all the way into the New Testament, all the way through. Jesus reminds us. Paul after that reminds us. Peter after that reminds us. Who is God? Who are you? Why does it matter? And so we're going to see now that Moses is doing it for these people, hoping and praying that they don't forget, so they don't get punished, because we're going to see what happens when and if they forget. So I'm going to get us started. I know that was a way of a big introduction today, but I just really find this area fascinating, and I love what he's doing with these people. So this is Deuteronomy 3:21 through chapter 5. And if I start in 3:21, because I like to always start at the beginning. So at that time, I commanded Joshua. So he's talking to not Moses, but Joshua, who's eventually taking over. I commanded Joshua, you've seen with it, and this is Moses who commanded, right? This isn't God. So Moses is talking to the Israelites, and now he's talking to Joshua. You've seen with your own eyes all the Lord your God has done to these two kings. So remember, he allowed those kings to be their whole land to be for them to die, all of their people to be killed, saving some of the women and some of the animals, and their land to be overtaken, because remember, those three tribes are living there. So he's saying to Joshua, you've seen with your own eyes all the Lord your God has done to these two kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you are going. Do not be afraid. He's saying, I focused a lot on this yesterday, a lot on fear. And again, I'm trying to focus on God is telling us to do things that we are going to do. I don't think he needs to remind us to do things that we aren't going to do, right? So we aren't going to have any issues following our hearts. That's a really easy thing to do. Well, I felt like I should go get ice cream, right? Like you're not going to have a hard time trying to convince me to do exactly what I want to do. He's telling them to do things that is not natural for them, things that they were already doing. So he's saying, don't fear. Remember what I did to those two kings. I'm going to do this to all the people in the land of Canaan, and I'm going to give you this land. And he's telling Joshua, because Moses isn't going to be with him anymore. Joshua is now the warrior leader that's going to lead those people into the land of Canaan. So one of the things that he says, so again, he says, not be afraid. And then in verse 23, he says, at that time, I pleaded with the Lord. He says, Sovereign Lord, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or earth who can do the deeds and mighty works? Sorry, got to switch pages. Deeds and mighty works you do. Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country and Lebanon. Then it moves on to say, but because of you, so remember, Moses is going to die. Because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. So God tells him that he is not going. And so I can imagine. So he gets to look at the land, if you guys remember. And one of the things that I notice, and that plays a little bit with my heart, is that he doesn't let Moses go into the land, but then he has to have Moses encourage the people to go into the land. So he's not getting the reward, like the very physical reward of being with God and with all the people in this amazing land, this land of milk and honey, this land where they can actually settle themselves down, live as a people group together, and eat good food, and celebrate all of their festivals together. He's not going to be there when they do that. So he knows he's going to die, and yet he has to, by God, to obey. So he has to encourage the people anyway and have them go there and do all these things. And so I feel like this. So here we go again with Moses kind of being a good guy. Sort of hate to use that expression, but kind of being a good guy, where that would be a really hard thing to do. But they do discuss the humility. God discusses the humility of Moses, and I think this is another area in which we see it. So just recognizing maybe when something is taken from us, right? How do we behave when something is taken from us? Do we still glorify God in it? Do we still encourage others to continue to follow God, even though we're going to suffer a punishment directly from God? And I know that maybe you would say to yourselves, well, it's really easy. Moses is actually talking directly to God. But again, I'm sorry, God calls us to really difficult things. And he reminds us all the time of his goodness, even if we're not uh, directly being impacted by what we would consider good in the moment. And so I think that's a good reminder for us. So he's told to strengthen Joshua. So moving on to Deuteronomy 4. So it says, now Israel, hear the decrees and the laws I'm about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and may go and take possession to the land of the Lord. So you're going to hear the you're going to hear the decrees, and then you're going to follow them. So you want to hear and listen and follow. And the reason it's Moses is teaching them, and it's so that you follow the Lord, right? So there's always, that's my favorite line in there. And it says, do not add to what I command you and do not subtract from it. I don't know if you guys remember, but in the very beginning, when I talked about, again, this is always where I like going back to the beginning, when I spoke about how Adam and Eve, Eve was talking and she said to the serpent, she both added something in and she took something out. And so I think it's funny that he's kind of saying that same thing in here. So it's a reminder for us that we want to remember. In some ways, we got to remember exactly what it is that he said, which again is why I think that he wrote it down for us in the Bible, because we're supposed to remember exactly. We're not supposed to turn to the left. We're not supposed to turn to the right. We're not supposed to add to it. We're not supposed to subtract from it. We're supposed to take it exactly as it is and do exactly as it says to the best of our abilities. All right. So, and if they follow Baal, they're going to die. So I want to read verse 6. And in verse 6, it says, observe them carefully, for this will show you your wisdom and understanding to the nations. Remember this, so that they're going to show to the nations who will hear all about the decrees. And they're going to say, surely this is a great nation and it's a wise and understanding people. So on top of obeying and listening to God, so on top of all this for us, it's so other nations, and again, remember I was saying earlier, like, why did he take these people apart? Why did he lift them up out of Egypt? And I feel like this is one of those major reasons. The other nations are going to see it, and they're going to look at it and they're going to say, oh my gosh, how wise are they? And then they're going to recognize they're wise because they follow a wise God, right? They're going to follow the God that created the universe. And so this is meant to encourage other people as well. So if you're looking for something for today, right? Like everything that we do circles around drawing others to the Lord, right? Drawing others to the truth, drawing others to what's important, drawing others to the God that created the universe. And they were supposed to do the exact same thing. It's funny, I feel like sometimes they pull away from that because they don't really invite anyone in to their faith. And I know Christians in some way are looked down upon for trying to encourage others to follow their faith and believe. And yet this, all the way back here, Moses was saying this same thing, that the encouragement was so everyone knew who God was. It wasn't to keep other people. It was never to set apart in order to keep other people out. It was always to set apart so other people could see who God was. And it was always meant to be an encouragement to others to turn away from evil and to turn towards good. And so this has always been the point of God. God is not a God that rejects. He's not a God that wants you to turn away. He's not a God that wants to punish you. He's a God that loves you and that loves people. And that's his whole purpose for having us do what he asks us to do in our obedience to him. All right. So moving on from this, and he says, don't forget what you've seen. So you have to always remember. So I want to move down here, and it says, and I want to go to verse 29. So kind of jumping down a little bit. this is more of a warning against building idols and making idols. And so in verse, let's say 29, it says, um, let's go to 28. So you don't want to worship any man-made gods made of wood and stone. So the whole purpose is we don't want to worship anything other than God. And I know he talks about it later, and he talks about it in his 10 commandments as well. But it's important not to build any idols. And again, this is something that we find ourselves doing, is worshiping other idols instead of seeking God. So moving to moving down, it says, so in verse 31, it says, for the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which he confirmed to them by oath. So he's again reminding that he will not forget you, he will not forsake you, and he will not leave you as long as you're keeping your covenant with him. So taking it down to verse 32, it says, ask now about the former days, long before your time. So again, he's still talking to these Israelite people, Moses is. Ask now about the former days, long before your time, from the day God created human beings on the earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other, has anything so great as this ever happened, or has anything like it ever been heard of? This is the important one, verse 33. Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire as you have and lived? So this is what is different with these people and this God versus others. He has come down, he has spoken directly to them, he has shown himself to them, he has shown himself in fire, he has shown himself in clouds. These people can directly meet with God. And so this isn't just an intangible thing that make us feel good. And I heard this actually on a podcast not that long ago, that they were talking about with the Gospel of Mark, and how the Gospel of Mark, sort of the whole purpose was just to stir up emotion to make you feel good. That is not what any of this is about. This is all about worshiping something that is real, something that is true. And right now, this God is showing himself to be true by living with them, inhabiting their area, so he can protect them and he can be with them. And again, obviously, always it's to show other people. And it's always so that it'll go well with you. All right, so moving down on this, I want to move down to obviously saying that there's only one God here, but I want to move down to verse 41, talking about, it moves into the cities of refuge. So it says in verse 41, Moses set aside 3 cities east of Jordan, to which anyone who has killed a person can flee if they had intentionally killed someone. And so he's talking about, right now, he's only, which I find really interesting, he's only discussing those outside areas that they've actually already inhabited. If you remember, not that long ago, they built up cities and everything around that area. And so there are cities there in which people who killed people can live. It says they can flee into one of these cities and save their life. And they named each of the cities. So they find refuge there. And then follows immediately in 44, it says, this is the law Moses set before the Israelites. These are the stipulations, decrees, and laws Moses gave them when they came out of Egypt and were in the valley near Beth Peor, east of the Jordan. So again, he's just focusing on the area in which they live. So moving on from there, I want to go into the 10 commandments. So mostly we've seen these, and mostly I brought them up and I've talked about them. He's reiterating the very basic but very deep 10 commandments. So once again, in verse 1, it says, hear, Israel, the decrees and laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn them and be sure to follow them. 3 separate things. We need to hear them, so you need to be able to listen, right? You got to, even when he says things that you don't like, we have to be open to listening to those things. Our hearts do not tell the truth. My heart tells me mostly what I want to hear, right? I am always the hero in my story, right? Unless I really screw up and then I'm the villain forever, right? In my story, like I'm an awful human being that shouldn't exist. But mostly I'm the hero in my story, or I'm the super duper villain in my story. Either way, it is not truth, right? Either way, I am listening to my heart and I'm not listening to God. So when we hear these things, there's going to 100% certain you are going to hear something that you don't like. It doesn't say stop listening. It says hear, right? So that's the first thing it says. Then it says learn them. So we have to learn them and know them in our hearts, because if you don't learn them, right, you don't hear, you don't learn them, you're certainly not going to be able to follow them because you don't know them, right? So we have to be careful. I'm a huge advocate of reading the Bible, not because I like reading, although I do. How else are you going to know what to follow in a world in which up is down, down is up, left is right, everything is confused, right? And that's, by the way, that's the world all through time. That's not just our generation. But when we have no idea what's right or wrong, how are we supposed to know what to obey? We can only know what to obey if we hear and listen to God, and obey what He does and follow Him. Follow Him, because you are obedient to everything that He says and does. Okay, so in verse 3, it says, one of the things that I wrote in verse 3, because it says, it was not with our ancestors that the Lord made this covenant, which I find is pretty cool. It's not with the ancestors, but with us, which is not really us, the Israelites, and all who are alive here today. So the covenant was made, this new covenant with the 10 commandments was made with Moses and all the Israelites that were pulled up out of slavery, right? So that's who it was made with. These are not promises that were made with Abraham. These are not promises that were made with Noah. These are not promises that were made with Isaac and Jacob. These are all promises that were made with Moses and Moses's people. So if you go back and you go, why didn't Abraham not eat pig? Why didn't Abraham, make these burnt offerings, right? These were not decreed during that time. So these are laws that were made directly for the Israelite people. This is their part of the covenant. All right, so 10 commandments, we go. Number 1, no other God. Number 2, we have no idols. And number 3, we have don't misuse God's name, which I actually prefer this to then not taking the name in vain. My version, which is NIV, it says, verse 11 says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. So again, I probably have said this already, but this is not using, like, being angry and using JC as a curse word. That you shouldn't do that anyway. If you're a follower of Christ, you shouldn't necessarily be using that, using it as a curse word, but it's using his name in general, using his name to do bad things, using his name and lying about it, using his name and fitting it into, any kind of views that you have that have absolutely nothing to do with God, right? So we want to be really careful how we use his name. All right. And then moving on, it says to observe the Sabbath. So in verse 12, it says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. And I've seen this a bunch of times, but verse 15, it says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. So I thought this was interesting, because why would he bring that up when it says to observe the Sabbath? What the heck does that have to do with the Sabbath? Is he just reminding us that he's the Lord? I think it's because when they were slaves, they couldn't observe anything. So they couldn't work 6 days and take off day 7. They didn't have the ability to do so. They were not able to observe the Sabbath. And so now that he has pulled them out of slavery, he is saying, take an entire day to honor me. And so what we see sometimes as a burden, like, you wake up on Sunday morning and you're thinking to yourself, do I really want to go? Or you question, should I be working today? Because it's, and again, for us, it's Sunday, right? As Christians, should I be working today? Because it's Sunday and maybe I should just take the day off. Maybe I shouldn't take my kid to a birthday party, right? The heart of the matter isn't some of the work that you do, right? Although for them, that's not completely true. But again, for us, there are some differences, and we'll see that as we move on in scripture. But the heart of it is to take the time to honor the Lord, especially when you weren't allowed to do that. So there was a time when they weren't allowed, and now they are given that honor to take an entire day to not work and to just sit and honor and worship the God that created them and saved them and took them out of Israel. That's the way I look at it. At least that's what I see biblical. I feel like there's a point and a purpose to him adding in that he took them out of Egypt. So then we move on in verse 16. It says, honor your father and your mother. Then you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. Don't give false testimony against your neighbor. So this might come under the idea of don't lie, although I think it's slightly different because it's talking about giving false testimony against somebody. So it's lying about someone or something. And then you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or desire anything. So then verse 22 goes, these are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness. He added nothing more. So he commanded it in a loud voice. They heard him. This generation, they were young, but they heard him. Because remember, 20 to 60, those were the generation, and anyone that was whining in the 20 to 60 range, those are the generation that died out in the wilderness. These people, a lot of them were born at the time. And so they heard or saw this cloud, this fire. God directly was involved in their lives. And I'm saying this because it is right in front of them. And then we watch them screw up. It is literally a picture right in front of them. So I want to read in, and it says he said in a loud voice. So verse 26, it says, I missed it already. 26, it says, for what mortal has ever heard the voice of the living God speaking out of fire as we have and survived? They have gotten an honor and a blessing that no other people have ever gotten. And yet. So verse 29 says, let's say everything they said was good. And then it says, oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. It's not because he wants to punish you. There is blessing in honoring the Father and doing all the things that he asks you to do. Blessing, it will go well with you. God loves you. He is giving you these things to maintain your ability to stay close to him and your ability to remain as pure as possible. So these things are good for you, even when sometimes they don't feel that great. I'm going to end this today. Crazy long one. I thank you if you guys stuck with me. I really appreciate it through all my movie review and everything. So if this was a blessing to you, if this helped you at all, if you enjoyed and appreciated the reading and the teaching, I would love if you like this. So just hit the like button, share it with other people, subscribe to the channel so you can keep getting it, or again, so you can go back and go to the beginning. And I will see you next time, guys. Keep reading.